There has always been this great secret within the circles of the colonial elite about who the American Indians were. In the early days of colonialism, many learned religious men took note of the Indians and the characteristics they found in connection with this idea. Over time, this idea became lost and suppressed as the agenda to fabricate history unfolded. If the question is, how is America Egypt? Then the answer is Hebrews in America. If the answer is Hebrews in America, then the question is, who the fuck are these people? This video will be a culmination of things we have learned throughout this series, America is Egypt, combined with things we have learned from the smartest beast in the field. It is essential to have at least seen a few episodes of the smartest beast in the field in order to grasp the material in this video. First, to understand the context of America is Egypt, or even Hebrews in America, it's important to understand the historical context of such a statement on a basic level. What is a Hebrew? What is a Jew? What is an Israelite? These are not synonymous terms. All Hebrews are not Israelites, and all Israelites are not Jews. Without doing an entire biblical breakdown, which you can find throughout the SBF series, I will explain the differences in an abbreviated version of the lineages and how they relate to one another. According to the most common genealogical interpretations of the Torah, a Hebrew is a son of Eber. Eber is a son of Salah. Salah is a son of Arphaxad. And Arphaxad is a son of Shem. Shem is a son of Noah, along with Japheth and Ham. Concerning the line of Shem, these men are representative of the first generations of Shemites following the flood. All the sons of Arphaxad, Shelah, and Eber are considered Shemites. But only the sons of Eber are considered Hebrews. Why is this important? The chronological significance of these generations is during, before, and after the Tower of Babel. The next designation of an Israelite is at least 7 generations removed from the first so-called Hebrews during the time of Babel. The sons of Eber, Peleg, Reu, Serug, Nahor, Terah, Abraham, Isaac, then Jacob, and Esau. All of these generations would be considered Hebrews, but not Israelites. The chronological significance of these generations is split by Abraham, whose birth is mentioned in Genesis 11 following the destruction of Babel. Another point of significance, Genesis 10:25 states, "And unto Eber were born 2 sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided." For in his days was the earth divided. What exactly does this statement mean? And if this is true, how exactly was the earth divided? One likely or plausible way this division of the lands could have transpired, of course, fits the Pangea model perfectly. And for as much as I hate the established theoretical bullshit of charlatan academia, I guess I'll fuck with them on this one, since it totally fits my narrative. And I'm not ashamed to admit that. So for a quick second, imagine this land division taking place within a short span of time, rather than 1 centimeter per year for 150 million years, as the charlatans suppose. What if this was a massive yet somewhat instantaneous event? Maybe the Atlantic was once a river before it became an ocean. The days of Peleg are often overlooked, but very significant in the course of establishing the landscape, borders, and divisions of the ancient world. The question surrounding Joktan, the other son of Eber, is another mystery in itself. The first question is, why are the generations of Joktan mentioned before the Tower of Babel in Genesis 10, and the generations of Peleg are mentioned after the tower in Genesis 11? According to the non-canonical book of Jasher, during this time, the lives of the sons of men were diminished and lessened. Is this why no one else would live past the age of Peleg, 239? And later, no one else would live past the age of Abraham, 175. The next chronicled person listed in the genealogy following Abraham is Isaac, his son. But it's important to note that Isaac is not the only son of Abraham, nor the firstborn son of Abraham. Ishmael was born before Isaac. However, his mother Hagar was supposedly a bondwoman. Eventually, Ishmael was sent away in favor of Isaac. It also must be noted that Isaac was the son whom Abraham had attempted to sacrifice in one of the most infamous, deceptive, and confusing narratives of Genesis in chapter 22. Where we are introduced to gods, lords, and angels. But moving along, the sons of Isaac are Jacob and Esau. These two sons would be the father of nations. Esau, the father of Edom, or the Edomites, and Jacob, aka Israel, the father of the Israelites. No generations preceding Jacob should be considered an Israelite, and no generations preceding Esau should be considered an Edomite. So although they nearly have the same genealogy up until this point, Jacob and Esau would represent two different nations. So remember, all Israelites are Hebrew, but not all Hebrews are Israelite. Now, with this being said, a Jew is a much more contemporary and ambiguous term. The term Jew first seems to only apply to descendants from the tribe of Judah. But this isn't completely accurate because after the Assyrian captivity and the first deportation of the 10 tribes, the term Jew became all-inclusive to the Israelites who remained in Jerusalem and later those Israelites who returned. As a group, they are rarely defined by tribal lineage from this point. For all intents and purposes, the term Jew could infer a separation of Israelite tribes or even Jerusalem, a term chronologically used to imply a post-exile context. The Israelites who were not taken could be assumed to have maintained tribal identities. However, through the course of history, these people, Israelites, have relatively traveled through the course of 2,000 years unidentified. Among the people who thought the Indians were the Israelites are some of the most well-known and respected men in American history. People like Ezra Stiles, the 7th president of Yale University and a founder of Brown University, contended against his academic peers and asserted that through his studies of Hebrew and Algonquin, that Algonquin closely resembled ancient Hebrew. On the connection between the Hebrews and the Indians, William Penn states, "Their eyes are black like Jews. They reckon by moons. They offer first fruits. They have a feast of tabernacles. Their altar stands on 12 stones. Their mourning lasts a year. Their customs of women are like those of the Jews. Their language is concise, masculine, full of energy, resembling the Hebrew. One word serves for three. One word serves for three. And the rest is supplied by the understanding of the hearers. And although we use a bastardized language today, we still speak like that. Now I'm talking about Lastly, they were to go into a country which they neither planted nor sown, and he that imposed that condition upon them was well able to level their passage thither. For we may go from the eastern extremity of it to the west of America. End quote. William Penn. And what about Edom? How do they play a role? Edom and Israel are of the same blood through their father Isaac, so their genetic connection is without question. But they both represent two nations in relation, but in contention. The Assyrians who carried away the Israelites during the first exile were also Shemites, but not Hebrews. It's important to understand this distinction. For the sake of this discussion, we should focus our attention upon Edom to draw certain parallels to our overall objective of establishing proof of Hebrews in America. Edom is synonymous with Rome. It's necessary to understand this connection and how it relates to the overall formula. Edom is also synonymous with bread. I've given you examples of where, in my estimation, biblical Edom is actually located. The red cliffs of the American Southwest. We all know the color red also represents Rome. And this can still be seen in the flags and the coats of arms of the nations, aka Goyim, of the former territories of the Roman Empire. The red in these flags goes all the way back to Edom. The table of nations in Genesis 36 goes even further to verify this parallel when it states that the sons of Esau became dukes. The term duke in its modern usage is most commonly used as a hereditary title, being the highest rank of nobility under a king. Edom arranged their clans into a confederation of dukes who would rule autonomously, yet separately, together, rather than be ruled by a single king. This is parallel to the way dukedoms in Europe have continually operated for millennia. A decentralized confederacy of nations, each with their own set of leaders and borders, who will work together if necessary for a common goal. For example, colonialism. Now we have a solid grasp on the background of the definitions. We can understand how this information applies to the subject at hand. De las Casas is the preeminent historian of Spanish New World history. He was a key witness to all of the happenings during the time of Columbus. Las Casas, born in 1484, died in 1566. He arrived in Hispaniola as a layman and then became a Dominican friar. He was appointed as the first resident bishop of Chiapas and the first officially appointed protector of the Indians. His extensive writings, the most famous being a short account of the destruction of the Indies, chronicle the first decades of colonization of the Caribbean islands. He is described and railed against the atrocities committed by the conquistadors against the indigenous people. He arrived as one of the first Spanish settlers in the Americas. In 1515, he gave up his Native American laborers and encomienda. Then he advocated before Charles V on behalf of the rights for the natives. In his early writings, he advocated for the use of African slaves to replace indigenous labor. He did so without knowing that the Portuguese were carrying out brutal, unjust wars in the name of spreading faith. Later in life, he retracted his position as he regarded both forms of slavery as equally wrong. Las Casas was firmly persuaded that the Indians were descended from the Hebrews, is evident in his own words. Loquela tua manifestum te facit. Your speech betrays you, as recorded by Torquemada. If the work of that illustrious prelate, who was intimately acquainted with Columbus, whose life he wrote, and who was one of the first Spaniards who proceeded to the continent of America, where he must have had an opportunity of becoming acquainted with the traditions, had ever been published, he should have known his reasons for coming to that conclusion. That Bishop was too rational to adopt the hypothesis embraced by Acosta and Torquemada, that the devil had actually counterfeited the history, laws, rites, ceremonies, and customs of the Jews in the New World. But he believed that the Hebrews had colonized America. So here's what they were putting out. If the Indians were doing anything that resembled Hebrews or Jews, the devil actually came to them and made them counterfeit the stuff the real Jews were doing. This is the shit they were putting out now. This is official doctrine. In reference to the Mexicans and other Indian tribes whom he took Las Casas to be real Hebrews, the words Loqueta tua manifestum te facit, in reference to the Mexicans and other Indian tribes who he took to be real Hebrews, deserve serious attention, because we have here the opinion of a person who is well acquainted with the Mexicans and Peruvians and who proceeded to America immediately after its discovery by the Spanish, spent there the greater part of a long life, and solemnly recorded in a testamentary document his conviction of a fact which he might have had many reasons for choosing not to divulge. Las Casas goes so far as to say that the language of the island of Saint Domingo, aka the Dominican Republic in Haiti, Las Casas even goes so far as to say that the language of the island of Saint Domingo was corrupt Hebrew. His conviction of a fact which he may have had many reasons for choosing not to divulge. Welcome back to our favorite place to discuss some of our favorite things. And one of those favorite things of ours are Hebrew artifacts. And of course, we know that all Hebrew artifacts found in America are fraudulent. Charlatan's Web quote. And we got a little charlatan on charlatan action going on here. The Bat Creek stone is an inscribed stone tablet found by John W. Emmert on February 14, 1889. Emmert claimed to have found the tablet in Tipton Mound 3 during an excavation of Hopewell Mounds in Loudoun County, Tennessee. This excavation was part of a larger series of excavations that aimed to clarify the controversy regarding who is responsible for building the various mounds found in the eastern United States. Oh, they wanted to clarify the controversy regarding who is responsible for building the mounds. In the late 19th century, when the tablet was found, Cyrus Thomas, the director of the mound excavations, concluded the inscription presented letters from the Cherokee alphabet. That's what Cyrus Thomas said. This interpretation was accepted at the time, but was contested about a century later by Cyrus Gordon. Oh shit, we got Cyrus versus Cyrus. Contested about a century later by Cyrus Gordon, a scholar of Near Eastern cultures and ancient languages, who re-examined the tablet in the 1970s and proposed that the inscription represented Paleo-Hebrew of the 1st or 2nd century. The consensus among archaeologists is that the tablet is a hoax. Surprise, 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 surprise. Supporting its authenticity, economist J. Houston McCullough argued that the ancient Hebrew text on the stone supports pre-Columbian transoceanic contact theories. Countering the notion of pre-Columbian transoceanic contact theories, archaeologists Robert Mainfort and Mary Quass have concluded that the inscription is not a genuine Paleo-Hebrew artifact, but rather a 19th century forgery. Another forgery. They're all forgeries, guys. Every last one of them. And look at it. It looks like shit. Somebody forged this. I remember one time in school, a teacher thought I had forged my dad's signature on a report card or something. So my dad's handwriting wasn't the best. My handwriting at that time was probably better than my dad's. And I can't remember. I think it was maybe like 7th grade or something. And my dad signed something. When I showed it to my teacher, she looked at me. She looked at me crazy. Speaking of forgeries, I don't know why I just popped in my head. That's pretty hilarious, actually. Oh, my bad. Continuing. Furthermore, the conclusions drawn by Mainfort and Quass have been accepted by other archaeologists and members of academic communities. You see where they steer you? Hey guys, all right, this is a fake. It was a forgery. Today, the probable source used by the forger to create the inscription has been identified. The probable source. Yet, the question of who made the tablet and why remains unanswered. Yet the question of who made the tablet and why remains unanswered. If that ain't a bunch of charlatan malarkey right there, boy. Listen, guys, we don't know who did it or why, but we know somebody forged it. Here's what they're not telling you. This was an official excavation. Charlton's Web quote, when Thomas began his investigations into the origins of the mound builders, he was under the impression that the mounds were made by a more advanced race that no longer existed. He argued that once America had been settled, the people tended to stay in one place, which meant that the archaeological record had been produced by the same people of that area through history. Although he did not do field work, he mapped out a plan of action for the mound excavations and presented 10 years of work in the 12th annual report of the Bureau of Ethnology for 1890 and 1891. So this was an excavation for the Bureau of Ethnology. By the end of his research into the origin of the mound builders, Thomas dismissed each argument advanced in favor of the vanished race theory. He dismissed those arguments. Hey, these people aren't vanished. They're somewhere amongst us, possibly. Hey, they're not hidden. They didn't vanish. The Bat Creek inscription was one artifact that Thomas used to support his hypothesis that the Cherokee constructed many earthen mounds. The evidence being that the stone represented characters of Cherokee syllabary. Thomas divided the mounds into a northern section, which was divided into 6 sections, and a southern section, which was divided into 2. These 8 sections, Thomas suggested, represent more than one nation. Thomas thought that migration was the reason for the mounds being spread throughout the East, but also recognized that the idea for mounds diffused through the different tribes. End quote, Charlton's Web. So I just wanted to let you know who Cyrus Thomas is. He was an official ethnologist with the Bureau of Ethnology. I often mention the construction of dams and how they play a role in the suppression of history. Continuing, Charlton's Web. The Little Tennessee River enters Tennessee from the Appalachian Mountains to the south and flows northward for just over 50 miles before emptying into the Tennessee River near Lenoir City. The completion of the Tellicoe Dam at the mouth of the Little Tennessee in 1979 created a reservoir that spans the lower 33 miles of the river. Bat Creek empties into the southwest bank of the Little Tennessee, 12 miles upstream from the mouth of the river. While much of the original confluence of Bat Creek and the Little Tennessee was submerged by the lake, the mound in which the Bat Creek stone was found was located above the reservoir's operating levels. So this was a mound that didn't get drowned. Think about all of these dams that have flooded these rivers. Many of these rivers are not as wide or as deep as they naturally would be without a dam. This also reminds me of the Egyptian temple that was found in Tennessee that was flooded by another dam. And I can't remember the name of the dam. I may have to look it up now because it's going to drive me crazy. But I'll keep it moving for now. So Cyrus Thomas said it was Cherokee. The real issue with this is it was found in an official excavation. So no one had any questions about the legitimacy of the artifact for almost 100 years until Cyrus Gordon actually said, this shit is upside down. This is actually Paleo-Hebrew. Hold on. Let's look at this thing again. You know what? That's a fake. I know you found it in a mound and everything was official. Everything was on the up and up. Okay. But a forger got through there. I don't know what happened. But somebody forged it. And why they forged it? Listen. Who forged it? It was a Mormon. There were some Mormons out there, right? There were some Mormons in Tennessee at that time. Listen, bro. There were some Mormons in Tennessee. They did that shit. Probably some Mormons. But we know one thing. This shit is fake. Now, I know we thought it was legit when it was upside down. But now that it's right side up, it's obvious. Listen, if it was upside down, it's real, okay? Here's the thing. As soon as you flip it over, it becomes fake, my nigga, okay? You flip it over. Oh, nah, that's fake. I didn't see it until you flipped it, and it looked like Hebrew, and that's obviously fake. Wonder why we didn't catch it earlier. It's not even Hebrew, bro. It's not Cherokee. It's not really even a rock. I don't know. Listen. All right, I got an idea of the hoaxer, all right? And still haven't figured out the whole point. So the man who translated this Bat Creek stone, Cyrus Gordon, as opposed to Cyrus Thomas. Gordon was born in Philadelphia, the son of a Lithuanian immigrant and physician, Benjamin Gordon. He was raised in an upper-class Jewish family with a particular emphasis on devotion to Jewish learning, rational thinking, as well as an openness to secular learning. As a scholar, he followed an education track typical of elite European philological scholars. Gordon began studying Hebrew at age 5 and became interested in both Greek and Latin as a young child. He'd been studying Hebrew since 5. Cyrus Herzl Gordon was born June 29, 1908 in Philadelphia to an elite Jewish family, died in 2001. Gordon took his bachelor's, master's, and PhD at the University of Pennsylvania and also took courses at both nearby Gratz College and Dropsy College. These 3 institutions had specialized programs in Bible, classics, and ancient Near East, all of which contributed to Gordon's historical, philological bent. At these universities, Gordon studied Old Persian and Sanskrit as well. Jumping ahead, because I like this part, despite his impressive pedigree, when Gordon returned to the United States in 1935, he was unable to find a permanent academic position, primarily due to the Depression, but also because of academic anti-Semitism. Academic anti-Semitism. He's an anti-Semitic elite Jew? How is that possible? Despite his impressive pedigree, when Gordon returned to the U.S. in 1935, he was unable to find a permanent academic position, primarily due to the Depression, but also because of academic anti-Semitism. We had charlatan on charlatan, we got Cyrus on Cyrus, now we got Jew on Jew, an anti-Semitic Jew, academic anti-Semitism. I wonder what he did. Probably just told the truth. Therefore, he took a series of temporary positions at Johns Hopkins, at Smith, and at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. Jumping ahead in Charlton's Web, a little bit more on Cyrus Gordon, the anti-Semitic Jew. Gordon also held that Jews, Phoenicians, and others crossed the Atlantic in antiquity, ultimately arriving in both North and South America. This opinion was based on his own work, now rejected by archaeologists, on the Bat Creek inscription found in Tennessee, and on the transcription of the debunked Paraiba inscription from Brazil, as well as his assessment of the Los Lunas Decalogue stone. And you notice they say everything is debunked, now rejected by archaeologists. Now debunked Paraiba inscription. It didn't say anything about the Decalogue stone, but also debunked. They're all fake. We don't know who faked them. We don't know why they faked them. And they were faked before anybody even knew how to fake them. By the way, the only person who could have faked them would have had to have the knowledge to fake them. And you know what? We read it, okay? We transcribed it. First of all, these letters are wrong. Everybody across the world use the same letters to represent everything. Bad spelling, bad grammar, this is fake. The grammar police are 5,000 years old. That's supposed to be a Tav right there? Come on, my nigga. What kind of Tav is that? That is an incorrect Tav. Nah, bro, these letters is all wrong, bro. Nah, I know. I know what they was doing back then. If anybody know what they was doing back then, I know what they was doing back then. And these letters is all wrong, my nigga. Gordon was a friend of John Philip Cohane and wrote the preface to Cohane's book, The Key. He was supportive of many of Cohane's theories. Additionally, Gordon collaborated with German-Mexican historian Alexander von Wuthenau and wrote the foreword to his book, Unexpected Faces in Ancient America. Gordon's diffusionist claims have been criticized by traditional archaeologists, of course. End quote, Charlton's Web. They have to make sure they keep adding debunked, diffusionist, he's been criticized, his assertions have been rejected. I admit he's a brilliant guy, but he's also a nutcase. So this article mentions Alexander von Wuthenau. Alexander von Wuthenau wrote Unexpected Faces in Ancient America. He found all of these artifacts with Negro, quote unquote, hard quotations, with black faces. Now, of course, it's always the vacation theory. Most of these theories center around people coming from the other side of the world, from Europe and Africa and Asia to America, as opposed to people dispersing from America. So the article mentioned John Philip Cohane. So I just want to let you know a little bit about him. Charlton's Web quote, Cohane published The Indestructible Irish in 1968, in which he proposed that the Irish people were of Mediterranean origin. In the book, he claimed that the original bloodstock in England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales is Shemitic. Cohane also published The Key, a startling inquiry into the riddle of man's past, which he claimed that before Egyptian, Greek, Phoenician, and Carthaginian eras, two major worldwide Shemitic migrations took place from the Mediterranean and scattered across the earth. The American linguist Cyrus Gordon was a friend of Cohane and wrote the preface to Cohane's book, The Key. Gordon was supportive of many of Cohane's theories. Cohane claimed that geographical names in America have a Shemitic origin. Cohane claimed that geographical names in America have a Shemitic origin. He also believed that 6-word roots are found in most place names of most languages. Another claim by Cohane was that the Phoenicians adopted the alphabet from a prior Shemitic culture, which makes sense. That's why the term Hebrew is somewhat vague, is a non-starter. In 1977, Cohane published Paradox, the case for the extraterrestrial origin of man, in which he claimed man is a product of interplanetary colonization. All right. So, he all over the place. Kohane's controversial ideas were rejected by professional archaeologists and historians as fantasy and pseudoscience. Well, of course, shit. Archaeologist Phil Weigland described the key as a fantasy mask as science and suggested that the linguistic analysis is methodologically unsound to ever be seriously considered. End quote. Charlatan's Web. Philip Kohane. But also claimed that the geographical names in America have a Shemitic origin. A friend of Cyrus Gordon. He also claimed that the people of England, Ireland, and Scotland have a Shemitic origin. Bernard de Sahagún, we've mentioned him before as well, was one of the first preachers in New Spain. Another early colonial Spanish historian. Over 50 years of work and living in Mexico with the natives. So he was very familiar with their customs. And he ran into some trouble. Sahagún, in the prologue to the Universal History of New Spain, expressly says that he was impeded in the progress of his work by the great discouragement he met from those who ought to have forwarded it. He states in a second book that amidst commendation bestowed upon it in the chapter of his order, which was held in 1569, it appeared to some of the defenders that it was contrary to their vow of poverty to expend money on writing such histories. And they therefore obliged the author to discharge his amanuensis. As he was more than 70 years old, he could not, on account of the trembling of his hand, write at all. And his writings remained for more than 5 years without anything further being done to them. In the meantime, the provincial deprived the said author of them and scattered them over the province. After the lapse of some years, Brother Miguel Navarro came as commissioner to those parts and recovered by ecclesiastical censures the said works at the request of the author. Grateful for the assistance which he had received from the commissioner, Rodrigo de Segura, he dedicated it to him, overwhelming him with the eulogies for having redeemed it, rescuing it, as he declares, from beneath the earth and even under the ashes. So they sent all of his work everywhere. So he's happy Rodrigo got his work back. Scattered his work all over the province. Sahagún further complains that he was forcibly deprived of a very valuable painting representing the Great Temple, with the court by which it was surrounded, which he says was sent to Spain. It is very evident that everything in Mexico calculated to draw attention to the ancient history of the country, more especially if connected with its religious recollections, was carefully removed from notice. It is very evident that everything in Mexico calculated to draw attention to the ancient history of the country, more especially if it connected with religious recollections, was carefully removed from notice immediately after the conquest. Immediately after the conquest, pieces of sculpture were mutilated or burned, paintings were burned, temples and edifices, which, from their size, it was impossible to destroy were suffered to fall into oblivion, and magnificent monuments of ancient art, such as the temples of Palenque and the palaces of Mitlan, were passed unnoticed by Spanish authors. Sahagún then engaged in the compilation of his history after it had been taken away from him and again restored, received three cautions. He received three cautions. First, to write nothing to prove that the Hebrews had colonized the New World. Secondly, to be guarded in what he said of the devils having imitated God and taking to himself a chosen people in the New World and counterfeiting the rites and ceremonies of the Jews. Listen to what I said now. Thirdly, not to advance the hypothesis that Christianity had ever been proclaimed to the Indians. What? Number one, write nothing to prove that the Hebrews had colonized the New World. I wanted to add this little tidbit regarding Bernardino Sahagún. Charlton's Web quote, in regards to the Florentine Codex. Sahagún wrote numerous introductions, addresses to the reader, and interpretations in which he expresses his own views in Spanish. In Book 11, The Earthly Things, he replaces a Spanish translation of Nahuatl entries on mountains and rocks to describe current idolatrous practices among the people. And what do we know about the practice of idolatry in the ancient world? It was uniquely part of the downfall of the Hebrews. Having discussed the springs, waters, and mountains, this seemed to me to be the opportune practice to discuss the principal idolatries which were practiced and are still practiced in the waters and the mountains. In this section, Sahagún denounces the association of the Virgin of Guadalupe with a pagan Mesoamerican deity. The Franciscans were then particularly hostile to this cult because of its potential for idolatrous practice, as it conflated the Virgin Mary with an ancient goddess. I wonder what goddess that is. Is it Ishtar or Astarte? And it's interesting that these guys are Catholics coming from a Catholic world. And then they say the Virgin of Guadalupe is a bastardization or a conflation of the Virgin Mary. And then the Virgin Mary is conflated with an ancient goddess. What's really going on here? At this place, Tepeyac, the Indians had a temple dedicated to the mother of the gods, whom they called Tenochtin, which means our mother. They performed many sacrifices in honor of this goddess. And now that a church of Our Lady of Guadalupe is built there, they still call her Tenochtin, being motivated by the preachers who called Our Lady, the Mother of God, Tenochtin. It is not known for certain where the beginning of this Tenochtin may have originated, but this we know for certain, that from its usage, the word means that ancient Tenochtin. And it is something that should be remedied for the correct native name of the Mother of God. Holy Mary is not Tenochtin. See what they're doing here? But Dios Inyatzin almost sounds like Inyana, another name for Ishtar or Astarte. Inyana, possibly Anna. It appears to be a satanic invention to cloak idolatry under the confusion of this name, Tenochtin. Interesting. And now they come to visit from very far away. And this is a real thing, still happening today. The cult of Our Lady, Mother of Guadalupe, is still very prominent today. And now they come to visit from very far away, as far as before, which is also suspicious. Because everywhere there are many churches of Our Lady, and they don't go to them. They come from distant lands to this Tenochtin, as in olden times. Sahagún explains that a church of St. Anna has become a pilgrimage site for Toki, Nawat, our grandmother. He acknowledges that St. Anne is the mother of the Virgin Mary, and therefore literally the grandmother of Jesus, Sahagún writes. St. Anne. is the mother of Virgin Mary and the grandmother of Jesus. Uh-oh.
Holy Mother of God!
All the people who come in as pastimes to the Feast of Toki come on the pretext of St. Anne. But since the word is ambiguous, they respect the olden ways. It is believable that they come more for the ancient than the modern, and thus also in this place idolatry appears to be cloaked, because so many people come from distant land without St. Anne's ever having performed any miracles there. It is more apparent that it is the ancient Toki rather than St. Anne whom they worship. End quote, Charlatan's Web.
Sobrevivo sin saber si voy. Sobrevivo sin saber si voy. Sobrevivo sin saber si voy. Sobrevivo sin dónde estoy.
Von Wuthenau's book is one of the most compelling cases for Negroes in America. The main issue with all of these people are they are still bent on using the evolutionary timetable and Siberian migration model to prove their hypotheses. Charlatan's Web quote, Baron Alexander von Wuthenau, also known as Alejandro, was a German-Mexican architect, diplomat, art historian, and archaeologist. He wrote several books on transcultural diffusion and the ethnic composition of pre-Columbian America, chiefly of Mesoamerica. Based on analysis of archaeological pieces, both his own and others, von Wuthenau argued that the continent, contrary to mainstream theories, was ethnically heterogeneous and populated by people of Amerindian, Black, White, Middle Eastern, Asian, and mixed race appearance, and thus had been thoroughly contacted by outside groups prior to European colonization in the 15th century. These ideas were opposed by many Mexican academics and have been described as lacking evidence. I wonder why Mexican academics oppose his works. This is not what they're supposed to look like. Who are these? Nah, bro. Nah, man. Mexico, you said? Nah. No. That's a mayate. Mayate music. Whoo. Mayate music. All right. Continuing. Von Wuthenau authored 7 books, most notably Unexpected Faces in Ancient America and Pre-Columbian Terracottas. The works display a wide variety of ethnic phenotypes, mostly niggas, in pre-Columbian archaeology, including Black or African, okay, well, all right, Shemitic, Japanese, or East Asian, Celtic, and mixed race types, and proposed several theories on cultural diffusion in the region prior to European contact. He said, man, listen, obviously I found all of these phenotypes. Yes, I propose that, somebody has come here before. Nah, they had been coming to America. It's still, the map isn't wrong. They didn't flip the whole entire world map on us, all right? They didn't just put fake places on the other side of the world when they're really over here. They didn't do that, all right? I'm not saying they did that. I'm just saying that people from over there came over here and had been coming over here. Continuing, among these theories is that a voyage of Hebrews or Phoenicians from the Levant reached Mexico in approximately 100 BC, a view supported by Cyrus Gordon, Barry Fell, and Ivan van Sertima. So although they're taking a controversial position, it's still rooted in the same theory. Von Wuthenau's theories on the ethnic foundations of Mexico were resisted by many of Mexico's academic community, It's all based in evolution. It's based in evolution. It's based in, monkeys have sex for 10 million years and become human. Two birds can have sex for 1,000,000 years and become elephants. Von Wuthenau's theories on the ethnic foundations of Mexico were resisted by many in Mexico's academic community. In an article in the journal Ethnohistory, the authors wrote that von Wuthenau presents no concrete evidence regarding the actual mechanism by which West African Negroids could have come to the Americas beyond the credulous acceptance of any and all diffusionist theories from the Mormons, 10 Lost Tribes of Israel, to Thor Heyerdahl's papyrus raft and Charles Hapgood's Ice Age civilization. He presents no concrete evidence regarding the actual mechanism. Now, we had one Jew, Cyrus Gordon, actually be accused of academic anti-Semitism. And this guy, is he a Jew? He's of the Habsburg line. He's more special than a Jew. So what do they say? He offers no concrete evidence, even though he has an entire book as a work of evidence. So it's not that he doesn't have any evidence, it is how they pose the answer. And they're saying, well, he doesn't tell you how they got here. There's no evidence in this book of how they got here. Meaning these people are who? Meaning these people were Americans. You see the Hegelian dialectic at play here? Well, listen, they had to come from Africa. If you don't know how they came from Africa, then they can't be from Africa. Furthermore, they had to come from Siberia, even though they don't look Siberian at all. Even though they don't even have Siberian genetics. They had to come from Siberia. Okay, I know you guys see these people who look what you consider African. They're Siberian, okay? They're definitely not American. They're definitely not indigenous. He sounds like a Mormon. That's all they have to do. Mormon is the conspiracy theorist of the academic historical world. Oh, you a Mormon. And yeah, you got to watch out for the Mormons because anytime some fuckery comes up, it's the Mormons. That the Mormon story is BS, but it's like, okay, what? There's something legit about it. I don't know about the secret gold plates. They probably did see some form of Egyptian that the Indians were writing, and they knew that the Indians were Hebrews. They created a whole reappropriation of a story that they're trying to tell, wrapped up in indigenous history.
Mexico City is a Book of Mormon land where many things happened from the Book of Mormon and where a lot of things took place. So they consider, from what I understand, they consider Mexico City to be the land northward of the Book of Mormon when some of the prophets and stuff wrote about people traveling north. And so they consider that's where is Mexico City. And that's pretty sweet to think I was in Book of Mormon land. They have pyramids there that are called, there's lots of pyramids, but there's what they're famous for in Mexico City is something called Teotihuacan. It's kind of a hard word to say. And there's three big main pyramids, and there's one that's called the Sun, there's one that's called the Pyramid of the Moon, and there's one that's called Quetzalcoatl. Quetzalcoatl, I don't know how you say it. And that's where they believe that Jesus Christ came down.
Quote, such was the reserve of the Spanish historians imposed upon themselves in treating of Quetzalcoatl, the Mexican Messiah, that his name, in fact, would scarcely have been handed down to us but for the preservation of a chance copy of the first edition of the Indian Monarchy by Torquemada. Again, it is evident that in Mexico, great pains were taken by the monks and clergy to root out the remembrance of him and legendary tales relating to his life were not allowed to be inserted in books published either in that city or in Spain. The Temple of Cholula was dedicated to Quetzalcoatl. Bernal Diaz, in his history, declares that he had forgot the name of the idol. He forgot Quetzalcoatl's name. Bernal Diaz, in his history, declares that he forgot the name of the idol to whom it was dedicated. Wow. Although he remembers the number of steps which led up to the temple. This was either out of compliance with the wishes or obedience to the command of others. The temple of Cholula was dedicated to Quetzalcoatl. These were the abominations that are spoken about in the Old Testament. Temples to other gods. Burning incense to other gods. Obviously, in Mexico, idolatry was key.
And that's where they believed that Jesus Christ came down.
And you deal with it.
They can't stop us. No matter what they do, they can't stop us. Lex. They can't stop us. Lex. Nah. They can't stop us. Yeah. We ain't build no slave ship. We ain't make those anchors. We ain't plot those grave sites up since daylight. Burdened by the things we try to make right. It's gonna be a late night. So much turmoil makes my blood boil. Kundalini, encore. Earth to sun broad. Dirt that's unsoiled. With one chord, tell a story that some spoil. Watch it unfold. Stories untold. Copyright unsold. Books with one spine. Ghosts with one soul. They want control. You want control. But we share one goal. We fight one foe. Set your front door. And it keeps knocking, but the people kept rocking. Yeah. It keeps knocking, but the people kept rocking, yeah. Stop, flex, whatever they do. They can't stop, it keeps knocking, but the people kept rocking, yeah. They can't stop us, no, nah, they can't stop us, no, they can't stop us.
An important biblical historical element to add to this story relates to the sons of Japheth and their arrival within the biblical narrative. First, who are they? Second, where are they from? And third, how do their relations play a role in the overall story? The sons of Japheth, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tuval, Meshech, and Tiras, are various Eurasian bloodlines. Gomer being the progenitor of the Celts, Franks, Ashkenazi, the Germans, Scandinavians, and East Europeans. Magog being the progenitor of the Mongols, Siberians, and Scythians. Javan, the progenitor of the Greek, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and Mediterranean bloodlines. Tubal, the progenitor of the Turkish, Anatolian, Caucasian, Iberian, and Caucasus people. Madai, the progenitor of the Persians, Medes, and Aryans. Meshech, the progenitor of the Armenians, Muscovites, and Russians. This group would ethnically include those who claim to be Jews today. The ancestry of so-called Jewish people hails from the region between the Black and Caspian Sea, once ruling a land ironically known as Crimea. Ukraine, Kazakhstan, southern Russia, and former Khazaria is the genetic homeland for the majority of so-called modern Ashkenazi Jews. Ashkenazi Jews make up about 80% of all world Jewry. Sephardic Jews make up the rest, along with a small percentage of Ethiopian Jews. Sephardic Jews have a higher mixture of Hamitic North African bloodlines, and Ethiopian Jews have a mixture of both, with a little more Canaanite and Caucasian mixed in. Nonetheless, Ashkenazi Jews make up the majority of all world Jewry. And why are they called Ashkenazi? Because their ancestry is in the line of Japheth. They are named after Ashkenaz, son of Japheth, son of Gomer. Therefore, they are not Shemites. They are Japhethites. Perhaps that's why Ashkenazi Jews reconcile their generations by maternal lineage rather than paternal. It's important to note that after listing the sons of Japheth, Genesis 10:5 states, "By these were the isles of the Gentiles divided, in their lands, everyone after his tongue, after their families, in their nations." Genesis 10:5 clearly tells you that these nations are Gentiles. It wouldn't take an Ashkenazi Jew long to read the Torah to realize he was a Gentile. So somebody better drop a midrash fast. Now, with all this being said, these Japhethic Gentile nations do not play a critical role in any of the most influential biblical events from the past. How could this be? It's easy enough to check the actual biblical narrative to see if the nations of Japheth begin to show themselves within the story, and their absence might surprise you. The sons of Japheth never played critical roles in the life of Abraham, or during the life of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, or Esau. The sons of Japheth never played a critical role during the life of Joseph, or during Israel's tribulations in Egypt, or during the Exodus. The sons of Japheth do not play any significant role in the early years of the biblical narrative. This is until the prophecies of Ezekiel. Ezekiel 38, quote, "Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him. And say, Thus saith the Lord God, behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal." The notable thing about this prophecy in particular, it was set for an appointed time in the future. Many people, including Christians, believe this prophecy is yet to be fulfilled and will be fulfilled in the end times during the book of Revelation. It's quite interesting how much chapter 20 of Revelation parallels these chapters in Ezekiel. Perhaps the verses from Ezekiel were appropriated to write the book of Revelation. They probably just removed the verse that said, according to Zeke the prophet, because the prophet Jeremy got mad. The question of has this prophecy been fulfilled is paramount if we are going to put this history into context. But to simply put it, yes, this prophecy has been fulfilled. And no, it has not been completely fulfilled. So maybe not quite that simple. The prophecies of Ezekiel are laid out in such a way as to tell a story of something that has already happened, but has also yet to occur. In addition to prophesizing what will occur in the future as a consequence of said aforementioned occurrences. Ezekiel is speaking in past tense about future events as though they have already happened. Ezekiel 27 mentions the various clans of Japhethites and their role in the mercantile kingdom of Tyrus. Take note that Javan, Tubal, and Meshech traded in the persons of men. These bloodlines include the Greek, the Spanish, the Italian, the Portuguese, in addition to the Turks, Armenians, and Russians. The sons of Japheth are not part of the story up until this point in the biblical narrative, and then still aren't playing a contemporaneous role within the context of the story. Why is that? How is that even possible, given what we know about all of their quote-unquote geographic proximity? And yet Isaiah 66:19 describes these people as being from isles afar off, in the context of Gentiles. But if Israel is really located where they say it is, why would these places be considered isles afar off? Probably for the same reason they are just now becoming part of the story. Now, who does this sound like? Grasping the Japheth narrative is necessary in order to have a contextual understanding about the historical Hebrew connection to America prior to colonialism. They, Japheth, or simply Europeans, knew nothing about the Israelites or the tribes until they came to America from the isles afar off. They were the first colonial Japhethic bloodlines to come in contact with the Israelites. If we combine this information with the background of Edom An even stronger connection can be made. Edom is confederate with the houses and bloodlines mentioned in Ezekiel. There was a secret relationship between opposite sides of the world, wherein the histories were exploited and reappropriated from America to Eurasia. Evidence points to a secret faction of Jews, Israelites, or Edomites who, by various conceivable means, came to exchange histories with Europeans. Are all of these nations repackaging the history of ancient America for their own? I submit to you that their entire geographic template is a forgery and a hoax. Why does the prophecy of Isaiah refer to the isles of the Gentiles as afar off, but they are clearly identified with the islands in the Mediterranean? Meanwhile, the Mediterranean Sea is supposed to be the Great Sea in the Bible, presumably the largest body of water on earth. But it couldn't also be the Egyptian Sea or the mouth of the Nile. According to the biblical geographic template, which we have gone over several times, the cedars of Lebanon border the Great Sea, which could not be the Mediterranean. And the cedars of Lebanon are the massive ancient trees mentioned over 100 times. Comparing these young, sad, shriveled, adolescent, less than 1,000-year-old cedars in Lebanon to the ancient giant sequoia and redwood is worse than comparing the Mediterranean to the Pacific. At what point did Gentile scholars realize that the people who claimed to be Israelites were not who they claimed to be? Charlton's Web quote, James Adair was a native of County Antrim, Ireland, who went to North America and became a trader with the Native Americans of the Southeastern woodlands. The reason that this person is important is because he spent a lot of time with the Chickasaw and the Choctaw. Quote, from 1735, Adair resided in North America for 40 years and was almost entirely cut off from the outside world. From 1744, he resided chiefly among the Chickasaw. In 1751, Adair moved to Lawrence County, South Carolina. He was entirely cut off from the outside world. In the 1740s, he led a British trade mission to the Eastern Choctaw tribe at the height of King George's War in an effort to win this nation over from French influence. He dealt extensively with Chief Red Shoes, the leader of the pro-British faction of the Choctaw. This eventually erupted into a fierce civil war against the Choctaw that led to Red Shoes' assassination in 1749. Adair went forward under the direction of South Carolina Governor James Glenn, but then vehemently blamed him for the mission's failure and the loss of his personal fortune. In the 1760s, he led a contingent of Chickasaw warriors against the French in the French Indian Wars, which resulted in 1763 with the most French territory east of the Mississippi being ceded over to the British colonies at the Treaty of Paris, 1763. Let's stop here, because in previous episodes we have discussed the French and their battles and their wars during the French Indian War with the Chickasaw and against the Natchez. You see where I'm going with this? Maybe not yet, but you're about to. James Adair was in the thick of the battle. He was there. He was a live witness to the lifestyle of these tribes, specifically the Chickasaw and the Choctaw in this case. Continuing, in 1775, stimulated by the encouragement of a few intimate friends such as Sir William Johnson, 1st Baronet, Colonel George Croghan, George Golphin, and Lachlan McGillivray, Adair compiled his notes in the form of a book. He mentions a string of disadvantages under which he labored notably the jealousy, secrecy, and closeness of the natives. But he hoped to be able to correct the very superficial notions that prevailed as to their civilization. His book was called The History of the American Indians, containing an account of their origin, language, manners, and other particulars sufficient to render it a complete Indian system with a new map of the country. The value of Adair's work as showing the relations between the natives and the English traders was recognized, and a German translation appeared at Breslau in 1782. It must be admitted, here we go. Before it was just information, but now it must be admitted that a very disproportionate space is given to the hypothesis that the American natives are descended from the lost 10 tribes of Israel. Thomas Thorogood, adopting an old idea of the Spanish Las Casas, had first maintained this theory in English in 1650 in his Jews in America, referring to Thomas Thorogood. Both Roger Williams and Jonathan Edwards seemed rather inclined to favor the view which, as elaborately set forth by Adair, has since found champions in Elias Boudendot, Star in the West 1816, and in Edward King, Viscount Kingsborough. Among the points of similarity between the Jews and natives, Adair emphasized the division into tribes, worship of a great spirit, Jehovah, notions of a theocracy, of ablutions and uncleanness, cities of refuge, and practices as regards divorce and raising seed to a deceased brother. The bias imparted by this theory to many of Adair's remarks led Volney to condemn the whole book in his Tableau du Climat et du Sode été uni, end quote. So Volney was like, nah, boy, what you talking about? But obviously Adair's work is important because he lived chiefly among the tribes of the Southeast. So he was a key witness to the happenings and the occurrences and the everyday lives of these Indians. So what does Adair say in his book? James Adair, History of the American Indians. And this was written so long ago, but it was written during the time where all the S's appear as F's in the script. So bear with me. Bear with me. Quote, History of American Indians, James Adair. Throughout this book, James Adair spends an incredible amount of time and energy showing the connections between the Cherokee language and the Hebrew language. And his information is so detailed, in fact, you can begin talking and learning the language by reading this book. And for those of you who are in the very least familiar with Hebrew, it doesn't take you long to realize that he's telling the truth. This is not a conspiracy. Many of the names that you see that have these Native American, quote unquote, Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw names, Delaware Indian names, Susquehanna Indian names, Iroquoian names. These are all different versions of the same root, Hebrew, quote unquote, a Shemitic language, which we explained already. Quote page 51. When the Choctaw are answering anything asked of them, they assert by saying Yah. This shows their ignorance of the vowels of the supposed divine four-letter name in comparison of the Cherokee, and that they are become less religious by profaning the divine name, Yah, which confirms me in the opinion that the Cherokee Indians were more civilized than any other neighboring Indians. So in this context, he's saying civilized because they didn't bastardize the name. Or so he says they did not bastardize the name. Could he be the grammar police in 1763, or does he have a point? He's saying this shows their ignorance, that they would use this name in this context. By profaning the divine name, they have become less religious. And this is in reference to the Choctaw, in his opinion. The Chickasaw called the Germans people of profane speech, or people who speak with a blasphemous tongue, because they would say, yeah, yeah, using the term Yah in affirmation to something. And the Chickasaw understood this to mean that they were using the Creator's name in vain. So the Germans were called the people of blasphemous speech. And it must be noted that the Germans, especially the early colonial Germans, were also Jews. So how many of these quote unquote Jews from Germany were saying, yeah, yeah, but profaning the name of the Creator? How do you feel about that? These are the opinions expressed by Adair, who lived amongst the Indians for over 40 years. And I find it interesting, especially here in his belief, he's saying that the Cherokee are more civilized. And that could mean a few things. Is it just connected to their usage of the word? Or is there another element to this? Possibly a racial element to this? Nonetheless, he did spend the majority of his time with the Chickasaw and Choctaw. Or so it is written. Quote, by the Levitical law, the people who had running issues or sores were deemed unclean and strictly ordered apart from the rest for fear of polluting them. For everything they touched became unclean. The Indians, as in a strict manner, observed the very same law. In terms of purity, these are very peculiar characteristics of the Indian that are undeniably parallel to the so-called Hebrews.
I'm just in
Quote, Star in the West, Elias Bodendot. Quote, page 113. Quote, the Indians to the eastward say that previous to the white people coming into the country, their ancestors were in the habit of using circumcision. But laterally, not being able to assign any reason for so strange a practice, their young people insisted on it being abolished. Mackenzie says the same of the Indians he saw on his route, even at this day. History page 34, speaking of the nations of the slave and dog rib Indians very far to the northwest. He says, whether circumcision be practiced among them, I cannot pretend to say, but the appearance of it was general amongst those I saw. It's crazy. So they was just walking around with their dick out? I mean, was they that butt naked, especially in the Northwest? You know, it's cold and damp up there, bro. Anyway, I'll be, all right. Continuing, Dr. Beatty says in his journal of a visit he paid to the Indians on the Ohio about 50 years ago, that an old Christian Indian informed him that an uncle of his, who died about the year 1728, related to him several customs and traditions of former times. Among others, that circumcision was practiced among the Indians long ago. But their young men, making a mock of it, brought it into disrepute. So it became disused. End quote. Star in the West. Quote, the storyline was further reinforced in 1650 when Thomas Thorogood substantially expanded the list of affinities by noting an American affinity for circumcision, as originally reported by Columbus. Along with Columbus's discovery of North America, he noted that many of the natives there were circumcised. The advanced civilizations of pre-Columbian America practiced circumcision, although the more primitive tribal people did not. Once again, this may reflect the loss of ritual in times of privatation. The Spanish conquistadors banned the practice as part of their systematic destruction of the indigenous cultures. It is now rare in South America, though more common in Latin North America. Quote, the Indians have customs consonant to the Mosaic law of uncleanness. They oblige their women in their lunar retreats to build small huts at as considerable distance from their dwelling houses as they imagine may be out of the enemy's reach, where during the space of that period they are obliged to stay at the risk of their lives. Quote, correspondent to the Mosaic law of women's purifications after travel, the Indian women absent themselves from their husbands and all public company for a considerable time. The Muskogee women are separate for 3 moons, exclusive of that moon in which they are delivered. By the Jewish law, women after male birth are forbidden to enter the temple, and even the very touch of sacred things 40 days. And after a female, the time of separation was doubled. Should any of the Indian women violate this law of purity, they would be censored and suffer for any sudden sickness or death that might happen among the people. Whoa. So when the Indian woman was on her blood moon, she separated herself, and she would be blamed for any sickness that fell upon the people if she mingled among the people while she was on her blood moon. We can talk all we want to about, oh, these characters aren't Hebrew. Oh, the Decalogue stone isn't Hebrew, it's fake. The Bat Creek stone is fake. There were no Hebrews here. But this is a distinctly Hebrew custom, beyond anyone's interpretation of language. Here's another cross-reference by Roger Williams on the practice of separating their women during the time of their monthly sickness. Quote, first, others and myself have conceived of their words to hold affinity with Hebrew. Secondly, they constantly anoint their heads, as Jews did. Thirdly, they give dowries for their wives, as the Jews did. Fourthly, and I wish I had not so observed amongst their nations as amongst Jews, and these, they constantly separate their women during the time of their monthly sickness, in a little house alone by themselves for 4 or 5 days, and hold it an irreligious thing for either father or husband or any man to come near them. End quote, Roger Williams. The women separate themselves from the tribes at their time of the month. You can't fabricate that. You can't say, oh yeah, you know that writing over there that you think was Indian, it's not Hebrew. They aren't Hebrew. Well, why are they separating the women from the tribe during their blood moon? Plenty of receipts. We are not even done. Should any of the Indian women violate this law of purity, they would be censured and suffer for any sudden sickness or death that might happen among the people as the necessary effect of the divine anger for their polluting sin, contrary to their old traditional law of female purity. Like the greater part of the Israelites, it is the fear of temporal evils and the prospect of temporal good that makes them so tenacious and observant of their laws. At the stated period, the Indian women's impurity is finished by ablution, and they are again admitted to social and holy privileges. Let's see what else Adair has to say. Quote, History of the American Indians, page 96. Quote, let us turn to the copper color American Hebrews. While their sanctified new fruits are dressing, not the new fruits, a religious attendant is ordered to call 6 of their old beloved women to come to the temple and dance the beloved dance with joyful hearts, according to the old beloved speech. They cheerfully obey and enter the supposed holy ground in solemn procession, each carrying in her hand a bundle of small branches of various green trees, and they join the same number of old magi or priests who carry a cane in one hand adorned with white feathers, having likewise green boughs in their other hand, which they pulled from their holy armor and carefully placed there, encircling several rounds. Those beloved men have their heads dressed with white plumes, but the women are decked in their finest and anointed with bear's grease, having small tortoise shells and white pebbles fastened to a piece of white dressed deerskin, which is tied to each of their legs. Let's get into it. They got a holy ceremony going on. We about to find something out here. Page 97, History of the American Indians, James Adair. Continuing, quote, the eldest of the priests leads the sacred dance ahead of the innermost row, which of course is next to the holy fire. He begins to dance round the supposed holy fire by invoking Yah after their usual manner on a bass key and with short accent. Then he sings Yo, Yo, which is repeated by the rest of the religious procession. And he continues his sacred invocations and praises, repeating the divine word or notes till they return to the same point of the circular course, where they begin. Then he, in like manner, and wah. What are they saying? What are they saying? While dancing, they never fail to repeat those notes. And frequently, the holy trains strike up, hallelujah, hallelujah, then hallelujah, and alleluia, and alleluia. Who are they talking about here? What group of people on earth still invoke these words unto this day? And the sad problem is they use these words in a Christian setting. Imagine the abominable nature of truly yelling hallelujah in a Christian setting. But nonetheless, who are the people who invoke hallelujah unto this day with a passionate fervor that could not be duplicated by any other group of people on earth? Is it hard to put a face to these people? Who are they? Hallelujah. Irradiation to the divine essence with great earnestness and fervor. They encircle the altar while each strikes the ground with right and left feet alternately. Very quick, but well timed. Looks like they two-stepping around the altar. Then the awful drums come in, the sacred choir, which incite old female singers to chant forth their pious notes and grateful praises before the divine essence, and to redouble their former quick, joyful steps in imitation of the leader of the sacred dance and the religious men ahead of them. And with the manly, strong notes of the one and the shrill voices of the other in concert with the bead shells and the two sounding drum-like earthen vessels with the voices of the musicians who beat them, the reputed holy ground echoes with praises of Yohi-Wah. Their singing and dancing in 3 circles around the sacred fire appears to have reference to a like religious custom of the Hebrews. And we may not reasonably suppose that they formally understood the Psalms or divine hymns, at least those that begin with Hallelujah. Otherwise, how come all the inhabitants of the extensive regions of North and South America to have retained those very expressive Hebrew words, or how to repeat them so distinctly and apply them after the manner of Hebrews in their religious acclamations, like cannot be found in other countries? End quote. James Adair, The History of the American Indians. Now you may be asking yourself, how did James Adair end up with these Indians? And furthermore, how did James Adair end up with all of this intimate knowledge of Hebrew? It's because James Adair was a Sephardic Jew. Quote, DNA analysis demonstrates that James Adair, the Indian trader and author who was probably a cousin of our John Adair, belongs to the male lineage pedigree J2, a common Mediterranean and Jewish genetic type. What's going on here? He's a Sephardic Jew. Remember back when I said Sephardic Jews have Hamitic DNA? We're starting to get the connection. A common Mediterranean and Jewish genetic type, to judge from a descendants test. It can be postulated that he came from the same Scottish Sephardic stock transplanted to Scotland and Ireland from the lands of the Mediterranean, and was in the process, like many of his Jacobite contemporaries, of keeping in touch with the family's Jewish past. What are they really saying here? His observations on Hebraisms among the Cherokee and Chickasaw Indians in his book, History of the American Indians, are understandable. They result from ethnic recognition. So we can see there is a growing relationship between these Sephardic Jews and Indians. Speaking of the Melungeon people, who are said to be Sephardic Jews with this North African and/or Portuguese ancestry. Who are they related to? Essentially, who is gathering the real intelligence? And this quote is from Jews and Muslims in colonial America. The Sephardic Jews were the first Jews in America. Who are they? They knew what they were doing when they came here. They knew exactly who the Indians were. This history is truly apocryphal. As we move forward in time, the things that once seemed to be too incredible to believe will reveal themselves to be the truth. We always knew they were lying to us about our history, but we just didn't realize how deep it goes. We've been lied to on so many levels about so many things. It's hard to believe anything they tell us. First, they tell us that the Big Bang created everything, and then man penetrated the firmament. They'll say you came from monkeys and evolved into a man. Then they'll say you came from Africa. They will tell you that Americans had no writing or made no significant contributions to ancient history. They will tell you that there were never any Israelites in America, and that these people are the real Jews. They must uphold that lie or their entire foundation collapses. But there is no doubt they know exactly who the real Israelites are. How could they not? They are the masters of manipulation and imitation. And identity imitation is a theme as old as the biblical patriarchs. The line of Cain imitated the line of Seth, naming his descendants parallel names to the sons of Seth. These copycat practices would continue even through Noah to the line of Shem. Most people think there is only one Shem, but in reality, there are two. The Shem mentioned in chapter 10 before the Tower of Babel, and the Shem mentioned in chapter 11 after the Tower of Babel. These are two different men. Most people may find this tidbit disturbing and unbelievable. But if this weren't true, why are there two Shems listed in the Book of Chronicles? One Shem has 9 sons, and neither of the names in their generations match. Additionally, none of the generations of Eber match as well. But the name of their children have been copied by the other. Meaning that one Shemitic Hebrew lineage is imitating the other. I wonder who is imitating who.